You can do this a simple way, or you can do this the easy way. Simple way is for you to go do what you're doing right now, keep doing it and see how that works. Or you can do it the easy way and take the time to just fill out some questions, ask some questions to people that are in your market, understand what's happening, validate that data, and then go, okay, I'm going to create an offer that's going to really resonate with them.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenly and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we have an amazing interview ahead of us, but before we get into it, just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show. Sometimes, like today, we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, and they're going to teach you how to do something that they do that's helped them be successful. Sometimes we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon and what those mean for them. Each Tuesday come by, we drop a Practical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that you can start using in your day-to-day. Sometimes we open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on. Send those over to us at podcast@loxo.co. And every now and then, Matt will come by for a mic drop episode where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants to share with everyone. So enough of my intro rant. Today, we have an incredible guest joining us for a conversation. So to set the scene, real talk, there are thousands of options out there to help an individual when they have hiring needs, right? So whether you work in a small recruiting agency up through the largest exec search firm or you're anywhere in between, one thing that you need to do is make sure that you are standing out. And part of that is knowing your unique selling position. So today we're going to talk about how to use data to create your unique selling position as a part one of a two-part series. So part two will be getting into how to use the data to inform your messaging and the angles in order to attract the right people to you. But with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest, Will McGhee, co-founder of Adalent Services and founder of Recruiting with Dynamite. Will, welcome to the show, and please correct me. I'm pretty sure I just said your your company name wrong.
No, I mean it's pretty right. Thanks for having me, Sam. Yeah, it's A-Talent, but you know, hey, Adalent, A-Talent, you know, it was a play on words. It's a word that doesn't exist, so I don't think there's a way to mispronounce a word that doesn't exist. So
Fair.
It's all good.
I should have looked at that. Yeah, and especially as like, you know, people pronounce Loxo wrong all the time. My last name, they butcher that. So yeah, knowing me, I should be like, Sam, you know, ask that question beforehand. Mental note. But hey, people are going to remember your company's name now, A-Talent Services.
A-Talent Services. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. I've been a big fan of Loxo. In fact, I have one of the original Loxo shirts here.
No way.
Because I was some of the original customers for Loxo. So big fan. I use it on our A-Talent side. My wife is using it right now as we speak, working on a director of IT role. And you know, I've been a big proponent of it. It's part of our recruiting stack too. So what we call our starter stack, Loxo is a big part of that. So love it. I love what you guys are doing.
Make my marketer happy. And I know Matt is about to, when he sees us, he's going to be jumping for joy for the first 6 months of me being here. He's like, Sam, we need to get customers. People love their Loxo t-shirts. I'm like, yeah, Matt, We'll get to it. But he's like, no, you really need to get on it. So just this past week, we finally got it set up. So you bringing that out as the cherry on top for it. Love seeing it.
It makes all my muscles look great too. So whenever I go to the gym,
that's what we're really after. Yeah, look great, you know. So we got new colors coming. So all that to come.
Ready to go
for today. Yeah. So let's set the scene a little bit. Basically, the last handful of years, recruiters have had it pretty easy. You know, there's been essentially more jobs than candidates that they could place, but the tide has shifted, and now we're seeing the opposite. There's fewer jobs available and more candidates that they can place. So as we start to get into the conversation that you and I are talking about with, you know, how do you create your unique selling position? What was the aha moment that you recognized you could help recruiters in figuring this out?
Yeah, like I think when you're setting the scene, I think you're absolutely correct. There's a lot of shift that's happening, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing though. So, you know, what we're seeing is more of kind of a lot of recruiters who jumped into the space in like the early or like the 2020, 21, 22 post-pandemic years, and just were trying to make a quick buck, or recruiting agencies that just overhired and just put butts in seats essentially. And then even internal recruiting teams that were doing the same thing and creating all this hierarchy of, sourcers and talent, coordinators and all this. It's like, come on, like there's so many different roles now. And you created a really big bubble. And now that bubble's popped, right? And now we're seeing kind of the aftermath of that kind of implementation. And again, I don't really think it's a bad thing. I think it's a correction, and I don't see it necessarily as, oh, now there's less jobs and more candidates. I think that there's quite a few jobs still on the market, and it's just more of an equilibrium. We are going back to the stages of 2014 to 2015 when jobs were still available and it was harder to get clients and get leads because you had to produce really great candidates to do that. You had to deliver, and we're now in that situation again, and you have to be able to deliver. And I think one of the big things that people kind of look at is, now that there's this dip in jobs, we're not getting any leads, we're not getting any opportunities, and no one's hiring using recruiters. But like, that's also not true, right? There's a lot of companies that are still using recruiters. There's a lot of companies that are still using services. They're just using different services, right? They're just not using you, right? They might have hired an internal recruiter. They might have had to put a RPO service in place. They might have created some sort of marketplace that they jumped into a marketplace that they could jump into that allows them to manage their costs effectively. And really what it is the capital has dried up, right? And so we're now looking at stages of do more with less, right? So, and a lot of times if you look at where the market has gone and shifted to, is almost every recruiting company offers the same exact thing. And they might want to package it differently with, we're different because we use AI. Cool. Everyone does now. We have a big database of 14 million candidates. Cool. I've got Luxo. That's 200 million candidates. Like, nothing is really that big of a differentiator what used to be differentiators back in the early 2000s and stuff like that. Proprietary software, not a big thing, right? You could market map. Cool. Right? So like, no one cares about it. And really, if you look at that and you understand what the actual problem is that you sound, look, and feel like every other recruiting firm, and you're just saying that, like, you're pitching on service about what you can do. There's not a lot of activity. There's not a lot of room for you to capitalize. And so one of the big things that was an aha moment for me was that happened back in like 2000, let's say 14, when data became like a real cornerstone of my process. And that was kind of the beginnings of it, right? So I wanted to find ways to capitalize on markets that were struggling to hire specific types of people. And the way I did that was back in 2014, 2015, there was a company called DataFox, and they actually just got acquired by Oracle. Or got acquired by Oracle a while ago. But back then they were just coming out, and I was always pretty big on data. I wanted to really capitalize on that market research because, as we were talking about earlier in the pregame here, like, I love to play video games, and I look at everything as a game, right? And I look at my path to success as a game, and I want to capitalize on that game as best as I possibly can. And I don't like failing. But at the same time, if I fail, I just pick myself up, go do my thing, and, test and iterate. And that's data, right? So when I talk about data too, like, so before I go into DataFox and what I showed, is I don't look at data as just a quantitative measurement. It's not just a single thing that you can look at with numbers. It's also qualitative. And I take like this scientific approach to it, because a scientific method to it, to basically ensure that I'm getting the best result I could possibly get out of every implementation I do. So I always like to start with that personal mindset part of it, is like, play the game and have fun with it, but also look at it as a test. And before you jump in and like start creating, new products or services or whatever that you think sound good, and use the data to help build that. So to answer your question, my cornerstone aha moment was with DataFox. I basically found this product and it allowed me to filter, search, identify tech companies that just got funding, what they did. It had descriptions on it. It's essentially Crunchbase of what it is today, but it was free for the first 2 weeks, and you could like download so much data. Like, Sam, I took advantage of this like nobody else did. And I'm probably the reason why they started putting caps on it, because I was just like, I'm going to stake everything, and then I'm going to just keep opening up new accounts under different names.
It's always that person, but hey, do what you can.
I had no problems with it. But it's because I didn't really need the data continuously, right? And so I did this and I found some trends, right? So what I was looking at was funding rounds that were above 10 million and where they were going. And I basically said, okay, where are they going? I analyzed that data and I found that it was in ad tech. Ad tech at that time was huge. Sam, you're in the marketing space. You know what programmatic advertising is, right? Programmatic advertising is a common term today, right? No, everything's programmatic advertising now. But back then it wasn't the case, right? Everybody was trying to figure out Facebook ads. And so it was a really great time to be in that space. And so then I looked at data on the tech side of internal data when I was at Cybercoders, and I saw where all the placements were happening with ease. So one of those things was, the way I kind of assessed that was what candidates were getting less rounds of interviews and getting hired faster, right? And so that was product managers. So I started playing around and trying to find product managers in ad tech, and it blew up for me, right? So that aha moment of using data to find potential clients as well as find the best types of candidates to go after was that moment of just sparking that interest in like really diving in. And then I can go into more detail about that, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's so interesting how you merge kind of like the booming industries with what are some of those titles, or when you do see who goes through the interviews quicker and everything else. So yeah, there are a couple things in there that I do want to talk a little bit more about. So you were talking about data. It's not just quantitative, it's qualitative. And one of the things I like that you said was that you also view part of that qualitative feedback and data as your own trials, successes, and failures. So this is something I always like to get into, because it's really easy to, put us all on pedestals, make it all talk about like, here's all of our successes, look at how great we are. But you learn honestly more. I think you learn more from failure than you do from success. That's what makes your successes better. So things almost never work out as planned at first. I'm sure you didn't just happen to land upon tech plus product managers in that example. So when you initially set out about this, like what were some of those qualitative data points where you were like surprised that something that you were first confident in would work and didn't, or something you're just like, there's no way this is going to pan out, and just like blew all of your expectations away?
That's a funny question. So my situation is very specific because I am a constant learner, right? I try to gather as much data as I possibly can from all the various sources I possibly can that can help me build a business in recruiting or whatever venture I do, right? So I don't just take, data from the recruiting space. I take data from the marketing space and all this other stuff, right? And I try and gather as much as I possibly can to make hypotheses on what is going to work and if it's correlative. But one time I did take a course from a recruiting guru that basically was talking a lot about the same things I'm talking about, which is like, hey, use like your data, use your lighthouse clients, et cetera, to find other opportunities. But when the one thing he missed on was long form content, and he was like, oh, you need to bring out long form email campaigns. And so I tried that, and it was to my detriment, because like I tried these I like long form emails. Anybody who's doing emails that are more than 50 words to I think 50 is the magic spot. I'm a big fan of lavender. So I recently went on to lavender and got a 97% score or 97 rating on one of my messages. And I was like, yes. And it had like 45 words and it was perfect. It was like literally the most perfect email I've ever written. And I like, if you were to ask me to write an email for you on the spot, I'm actually really terrible at it. It takes me a long time to condense stuff. So, I thought long form content, that's great. Like, let's go with it. Cause like, I'm really good at being verbose, and it failed, and it failed miserably. And I think that was one of those moments of like, it hit me in the head of like, don't do that. don't send out long messages about how you do things. Everything that you create needs to be about your candidates or your clients and how they are getting to their aspirational states. So I went back to those things and I really fundamentally broke that down on a scientific level, and that really helped me build out from there.
So what I love that you did there is I call this is what I like to call bridging the gap between scientific method and data and common sense. Like
Yep.
you met perfectly in the middle of both, because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about long form content. It's about you, and you're sending this to people that haven't opted in, most likely.
Yes.
In what world, if you're on the receiving end of that, do you think I can't wait to read this like email, and I'm just going to keep scrolling and scrolling through? So very different when you choose to opt in. Like, I want to learn from this person, but even then, if it's about you, it's still gonna flop. So I'm glad that you were just like, hold on, let me take off this old course hat for a second and say, this isn't working. I'm not going to keep trying to like push it and keep digging deeper. So that's phenomenal. So, all right. So you talked a little bit about, what you learned, some things you went along the way. So now this is my favorite part, where it's like, I use this selfishly to learn a little bit from people like you, but also our listeners can hop in to say like how you've talked about solving this problem now. And especially like you've touched on how you use data specifically. So how, like, you probably have some type of framework or a playbook or something. So what's the starting point for this? Like, you walk into an agency or someone's like, how do I figure out where to begin? What do you do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I actually call this the precision prospecting method, and it's a big part of what my course that I'm coming out with pretty soon is all about. And really, that starting point is understanding first and foremost what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? So a lot of times, like I said, I mentioned before, and I kind of touched on this, is there's a lot of recruiters out there who go into this game looking at it in the perspective of what I can get out of it. And you need to shift that mentality very fast, because the market has become smarter. They definitely understand what's available to them. They're more educated than they ever been. And the way you present and the messaging you use, if you're coming from it from a perspective of what I can get from you, it reeks, and nobody wants to work with you. And so a lot of the times people just don't understand why they're in the business, what problems they're actually solving. So that's kind of the big part. So I question everything about their current market. What is it about your current market, and how are you actually solving a problem? And then what it ultimately comes down to is realizing, and I'm giving you the 5-second version of that part of the course, which is you're not the solution. If you're a standard recruiting firm with 20 to 30% fees, your candidates are the solution. They're the product. They're the actual solution. And the problems you're solving aren't hiring related. They're not hiring related. They are helping, let's say, a CFO create a better financial system and operating team that will help them go from Series C to IPO in the next 2 to 3 years by hiring a CPA that's done that before and understands that problem. So if you can break that down and you can really understand what you're going into market for, your messaging, everything becomes so much simpler, right? Everything, like you can go into it knowing that you actually are providing value, and it's not just like, oh, I found a candidate and here's another resume. It's like, hey, this candidate's great for you because I understand what you're going through right now and I'm meeting you where you're at, right? So what and why you're doing it for yourself, that's on a deeper level. You need to understand what and why you're doing it for your candidates, what and why you're doing it for your clients, what and why you're doing it for your business, what and why you're doing it for your staff, right? And if you understand those 5 parts, then like everything just becomes much more aligned. And this is actually an exercise I had to recently redo because I was like playing around in the space and like I was like, I'm getting lost in a little bit in kind of the content I was creating and like what I was trying to do. And then I was like, let's take a step back, and you have to constantly reevaluate it. So that's number one. Then the second part of that is then identifying and validating your market, right? Question everything. So if you're working in, let's say, Python software engineering, and you're looking at trying to place those candidates in, the standard tech market, I have some pretty bad news for you. That market is probably hurting the most right now, right? Because funding has dried up. So you have to identify where that money is going. Identify, like, that's my first thing is like in the identification process is look at the money, follow the money, see where the funding's coming, understand where that source of money is coming. Is it coming from VC? Is it coming from private equity? Is it coming from the government? Is there some, big bill that's getting produced that's going to really inject cash into this market? Because if there's money going into the market, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be some jobs that are going to be opening up because they're going to want to utilize that money effectively, unless you're in California, of course. So, like that's essentially what you're doing first. Identify where the money's going, and then you validate it. And the way you validate it is looking at what jobs are available in that space. Start with industry, like what companies are growing, what are the big movers and shakers? Are people following suit? Are there any trends? What are they talking about? And if that's the case, then like if you figure something out, what are the big problems? Look at a hot job that is probably that most people are dealing with issues with. So in today's world, accounting is one of the hottest jobs on the market right now because there's just not enough supply to meet the demand. So if you're in a hot market with a hot candidate pool, you can identify that's the actual problem that people are facing. And then you have to understand what those people are doing. So many times we've been put in desks just saying, hey, go market these jobs, market these candidates. And we're told that by producers who are great at their job because they probably jumped in at the market at the right time. And now they are sitting back, relaxing and enjoying the fruits of being a manager and telling you what to do. And that stuff worked for them. Oh, well, C#.net, that was VB.net was the thing of my day. I'm going to tell you to go after the same thing. Please just focus because this is really working. And guess what? That's gone. Like those days are gone. So you need to validate if that's an actual market that you can actually produce in. And the way to do that on a metric level or on a quantitative level, look at the job boards. How long have the jobs been open? How many jobs are open in the last 3 weeks? What's happening? And I don't even use so my method of getting business, I haven't looked at a job board to pick up a client in probably 6 years because I actually think it's a crutch. I don't use Recruiter, for example, because I think it's a crutch. Everybody who's looking for the person who's open to work right now or looking to work with a company because they posted a job, you have jumped into a space that is completely murked with tons of recruiters and you're late. You're late. If it's been up for more than 3 days, you're late. Right? Because now you're just competing against everyone who saw the same exact thing. That's an advertisement. So try and get in front of things before that happens and talking to the pains that people might be feeling through observations that you've made about people in that stage. So that's the identify, validate, and understand part, right? The understanding part is really a big part of that. And that's really my method when it comes to looking at those things. And I can keep going. I don't know if you have any questions, but that's a dense part of what I do.
Oh yeah. I've got a half page of notes. I'm ready to chop up in here. But
let's go.
The one thing I love the most about this is people are listening, and there's nothing in here that is groundbreaking, this like super new novel thing. I swear every conversation comes back to it's like the unsexy things, the foundational things. Do those well, you will be successful, because so many people want the shiny object or something else. So a couple of things I do want to get into when we were talking about the first part of like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And then starting to branch out, like for myself, for the candidates, for the hiring company, for everyone else, like that is a perfect exercise. Go grab a cup of coffee Friday morning for work. Just go sit down 15 minutes with a notebook, start jotting it out. That will make your life so much easier, because what that's going to get you to is the example that you shared about, the problem that you're solving for is you're helping a CFO who wants to go from Series C to the IPO. In the broadest sense, most recruiters, like I recruit, and we'll stay on the finance trend, I recruit accountants, I recruit controllers. But what happens when that market dries up? So say that wasn't a hot market right now and there aren't that opportunities. If that's your identity, if that's your pitch, you've got to transition hard, and that's going to completely throw you for a loop too. But if you know that the problem you're solving for is I want to help CFOs understand how do we grow from Series C to IPO, there are so many other opportunities, candidates, paths to go down that help them accomplish that. So I like that you go up to that level, because that's what's going to keep you grounded no matter what market you're in or anything that you're going for. You have to be more holistic with it.
Yep. And that's essentially niching, right? And so a lot of people talk about niching all the time, and I've said this on almost every podcast I've been on, is I can't stand that word because people don't know what it means. And they focus on like, oh, well, the riches are in the niches. I completely agree with you on that. Riches are in the niches, but it's not necessarily that you work with Scala, right? Or this demographic check mark, right? And that's the part. Is like the niching isn't about you just creating an identity around that. It's about understanding what those problems are and being able to provide solutions. And guess what? When those solutions or those problems go away, your solution no longer exists. And that's what's happening right now. Like, so the people aren't having problems hiring for, certain roles that are out there, specifically in like engineering or in recruiting, like recruiters for companies. So rec to rec recruiters are hurting right now, right? But it's because they niched in this like concept of as this overly broad concept of like, oh, I just place other recruiters at internal companies. But why? Why does a company need a recruiter? What companies have you been best suited to help? What recruiters do you like to help? So if you really understand that, you can essentially pivot faster and you can help create better solutions for different markets. And I've never heard of a company that's been successful being like, well, we do one product really well. It's like In-N-Out still has a menu. They're freaking great at creating burgers, but they have a variety of different things that you can select from, right? Every successful company has learned to expand and grow within a skill set and provide different services and solutions and products that are fit to any given number of ideal clients. It's there's a guru out there, Ken, can't remember his last name. He talks about having a portfolio of offers, and that's essentially what we're talking about. Is you have to have a portfolio of solutions that you can create for anybody in a given cycle.
Yeah. So true. And In-N-Out, they have that secret menu because they know some people want more than just the small thing. So they're expanding. So the second part of that then is, as we're thinking about having multiple offers or anything else, when you go to those people that are chasing the job boards, essentially, and that is, to me, that's the epitome of you're a commodity at that point, because there are so many people vying for that attention and everything else. So you aren't differentiating. You have zero. You're a race to the bottom at that point. Who's willing to go below the 30% rate or 20%, whatever it is for the role, and it's not going to be the best client experience for you.
And do the work for free, Sam. Let's bring up that part too.
Contingent, yeah. Have fun with that one. So, yeah, there's so much to get into, where I like how you say it's like, how are you getting ahead of that pain before that search even begins, or before you have to go to the job board. And I'm not going to go down the marketing rabbit hole with you, because that's the core of my whole philosophy that I follow. But so you've talked about some of the steps that you would take. Now getting into the understanding of, okay, say recruiters started to implement these, they've done the work, they've listed out their, the criteria that they want to work with. They know their what, they know their why. What are some leading indicators or anything that they should know? It's like, I've started to put in the work towards this. Is there any positive, negative indicators that they should be looking towards as they start to kind of correct and figure out what's the path that I should be taking from here?
Great question. I think one of the big things is the if you're looking at a leading indicator for if you need to do this right now, you're listening to a podcast about how to get better leads and do better at your job because you're probably hurting in your current situation. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. You're trying to gather data right now. So that's a really big indicator. Unless you're like me, and like so many of the people like me who is just constantly trying to learn. That's one other, prospect of individual. And I think those people are definitely ahead of the curve in that situation. So constantly learn, constantly listen to these podcasts, constantly grow. But if you're in a situation where you're just like, I'm not getting leads, that's a pretty good indicator you might need to change something up. You might not be offering something that is viable or that's specifically unique. If you're constantly running into the price issue, right? Of, hey, like, you're too expensive, or we're not using, recruiters right now because it's too costly. You're not positioning yourself as you're not positioning your candidate as a true solution enough, or you're not providing a good enough offer. There's all these things that come into play that you need to start looking at. And that's one of the big parts of my course, right? Is like understanding what those things are. So that way you can create better offers, right? And you can create solutions if you're going to productize or solutionize your business, right? I think one of the big things that I've actually found is my favorite businesses in recruiting are usually the ones that have learned to productize their service. And somebody who I'm a really big fan of right now is a gentleman named by the name of Cole Gordon. I don't know. Have you heard of Cole Gordon? Do you know who he is?
I haven't, no.
So Cole created a company called Closer.io, right? And his market is very unique. It's not one that you typically hear of, right? It's the coaching and guru space. I actually came across his stuff because I was creating a course, and he created he had an ad targeted directly to me about, hey, are you a course creator with a high ticket offer and you need salespeople to basically, or you need a setter and a closer, or do you have people who are in your database right now who maybe have dropped out of the sales cycle or abandoned their cart? Well, we offer a solution that basically brings in trained, experienced salespeople to go in that you don't have to pay unless they're performing, and go call, interact with those people, and help you close those deals. And guess what? Like, if we're not performing, you don't have to pay us for it, right? But the service really is a contract salesperson. It's a 15 to 20. I think it's like they pay somewhere between $15 to $20 an hour for the service, and then they get a split of commission. And so he turned Closer.io, which is essentially a recruiting company, into a $0 business to a $32 million business in, I think, 32 months or some shit like that. Sorry for cussing. But it's wild, because if you look at what he's done with a very small team and unlimited resources, it's really impressive. And I love that story because he doesn't even have a recruiting background. So he took the concept of recruiting and flipped it on its head and was like, I'm not going to talk about recruiting. I'm not going to talk about how we help scale or sales organizations and we place the best A players in the team and like all that. No, he said, hey, look, we're going to come in and handle a full service. Like, we'll train, manage, create all the KPIs. All you got to do is sit back and give us your pitch, and we'll place people. And then on the opposite side of that, he has a whole marketing function, an advertising function about getting closers into the process. So his recruiting arm is running on advertising too. And he's like, and his recruiting arm is like, hey, you want to make an extra $3,000 a year or $3,000 a month? Guess what? We have this really great opportunity to have you go in, set appointments, or even close deals, and you get a commission off of it. And it's usually between 15 and 30%, right? It's like, dude, you're crushing
He's figured it out. Yeah.
He's figured it out.
It's
And
solving a problem. Yeah. He's got the
genius.
solution to it.
It's genius. It's genius. And I love it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Alex Ramosi, one of my favorite people. He's a recruiter. And he won't say that, right? But what is he doing with acquisition.com? If you listen to what he talks about, he's like, we go in and we invest X amount of money into companies that are doing 10 million or more. And one of the big services we offer is helping them staff up executive talent because we have the network. So again, sounds like recruiting to me. So he's a recruiter. If you understand your why and who you serve, that shit becomes so much easier. And it's wild, right? And I have this worksheet I have people do, and a lot of times they go, oh, this is a lot for me to do. And I'm like, you can do this the simple way or you can do this the easy way. Simple way is for you to go do what you're doing right now, keep doing it and see how that works. Or you can do it the easy way and take the time to just fill out some questions, ask some questions to people that are in your market, understand what's happening, validate that data, and then go, okay, I'm going to create an offer that's going to really resonate with them and have a really good solution that's behind it, whether that be my candidates or my solution. And guess what? It sells itself. And it just sells itself. It makes it so easy for you. So I don't know if that answers your question on what are my leading indicators.
Yeah. No, it definitely doesn't. I mean, it's like you pick which one of those, picture yourself 6, 12, 18 months down the road, which scenario sounds like it's going to be in a better spot for you. It makes it pretty hard to be like, okay, well, I guess I am being a little short-sighted there. So you kind of started to touch on it, but I always like to ask like one final question is, what's a common objection to not doing this? Why would someone hear what you're doing, think like, oh, I don't need to worry about that? Like, what are those and how would someone overcome that?
Yeah. Common objection is exactly that, right? Like just, oh, this takes too long, or I don't have time for that. I don't see how this is actually helping me right now. And so everybody's super short-sighted because they're dealing with the pain right now instead of looking at what that pain is going to look like in 3, 6, 12 months. And one of my favorite quotes is like, you could tell the success of a person by how far out they start to think, right? And if you're thinking in terms of 30, 60, 90 days only, and that's all you talk about is, oh, I've got so much revenue on the pipeline for the next 30, 60, 90 days, or like I'm doing this for the next 36, like that's all you talk about. You're not talking about legacy or growth or, 5 years out, even let's say even a year or two out, like what your plan is. Like likelihood is that something's going to shift in the market and you're going to be stuck in a situation where you're probably not going to be able to handle it, right? And you'll probably look at something and jump ship into some new AI, trend and be like, oh, that's going to be the magic bullet for me today. And you're going to have all this shiny object syndrome and not really focus on, like we talked about earlier, is sticking to the fundamentals. What I'm talking about isn't, like you said, unique or crafty in any way. I'm just applying it to recruiting. It is essentially business 101. And I've dumbed it down to as simple as possible for recruiters to understand how they can implement it in their sales process today, right? And so like that's a big part of what I talk about because it's not rocket science and it doesn't have to be, but it does require work. And so don't think of things in 30, 60, 90. Think of things of what's the next 5 years look like for me? And then work backwards, right? How does my desk look in 5 years? And what do I need to do to get there? And then create a plan around that, because that's the best thing you can possibly do. And that is essentially a part of the validation process, right? Because if you're looking out 5 years, you have to say that this particular situation that you're jumping into or this trend or whatever it is has staying power for the next 5 years. right? And that you can build a business around it. Otherwise, you're just jumping onto a trend that's going to lose money super quick, or you're going to gain a short-term gain, and then you're going to have to pivot again and change again and all this other stuff. Like I've pivoted probably 4 times in my career, but I've maximized every single penny I possibly could out of that, as an individual, right? Not necessarily as a team, because like I just know how to do market research better than most people. The stuff that I look at and analyze and I'm able to synthesize out of it is a big part of that. So
Yeah,
do the work.
Yeah, simple as that. So you touched on honest. This is something I absolutely love, and I go back to all the time as well. It's the how do you balance short-sightedness, long-term? How are you thinking? Is it, like you said, 30, 60, 90 days? Is it 1, 3, 5 years? So analogy, story. Think of you. We've all heard the story of you've got 2 planes that are flying parallel. You set one off course by 1 degree. Over the first 50, 100, 200 miles, it's not that big of a difference, but you let that go longer and there's a very big difference in where those 2 end up. So the same exact thing happens when you take this approach. Well, I don't want to do the work right now. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. Okay, well, map out what do the next 30, 60, 90 days look like if you keep going with status quo? What do the next 30, 60, 90 days look like if this? Well, of course, short-sighted is going to look better. But if you truly are thinking 3, 5 years down the line and you have those numbers with, you can do your funnel or whatever those numbers look like, I can guarantee with 99%, unless you're doing something completely wrong or out there, that the 3 to 5 year plan will look better. And then when you look back at that next, the 30, 60, 90 days we're worried about here, that's a blip. You're going to see a tiny little decrease, but then you're going to see that uptick and you're going to go right back up. So yeah, it's not a fun conversation to have, but that's why I say, and you get this, like go to your numbers, use the analysis you have, the quantitative, the qualitative, and that will be your best friend when you go to whether it's justifying to yourself or leadership, whoever it is that needs to get the buy-in with it.
And the thing about numbers is they don't lie. I think that's the best part about it, is that if you look at your numbers and you're just genuinely like shocked at like how little you've built, go look at what kind of output you've created. And on the quantitative level, right? How much output did you do? Or I should say in the business, how much input were you putting into the business? So how much were you sending out messages? How many phone calls did you make? How many conversations did you have? Like genuine conversations, not, hey, I've got a candidate. No, like, cool. What problems were you solving? How did you solve them? And then on the qualitative level, look at like the conversations you had. And one of my favorite tools is Fireflies, because you can, I use Fireflies on every call because I can go back and assess like how much was I talking versus they talking? What were some of the big questions that they were asking? And I can use that for not just my data on my offers, but on my content, my messaging, everything, right? Because there's a common theme that keeps coming up, and it's especially in my space, which is like the coaching space for recruiters, is I don't know how to get leads. I'm having trouble getting leads. And so like now I'm listening to that and saying, okay, well, I need to create, that's why we pivoted our RWD from talking about automation and AI, because like, it was like, okay, that's great, but really people are having a hard time with leads. So now all of our messaging right now, all of our content right now is, hey, how do I help you get leads? And how can you use tools like Loxo and automation to do that? But like the meat and potato of it is, let's get you more leads, whether it be on the candidate side or the client side. So that's what we focus on. And if you've been listening and you've been hearing me talk about my course, like just as a little quick plug, if you want to join that course or want to get access to that course, I'm actually going to give anyone who listens to this podcast free access to it. So once it launches and everything like that, and you'll get access to my community and everything like that. So I want you guys to test it out, play with it, use it, have fun with it. But the way you do that is just DM me after this and find me on LinkedIn and tell me Loxo love. Like that's the words. Loxo love is the only way you're going to get it though. So
love it. Perfect. It's music to my ears. So yeah, I mean, take them up on this offer, y'all. It's a great opportunity. Just as we say, to, go back to some of those fundamentals and start thinking about what you should be doing. So dude, I appreciate you joining for this. I am stoked for our part 2 that will be coming up, where it's like, all right, we've discussed, how we're going to use the data and everything, but like, how does that inform your messaging? What are the angles that you should be taking to that? So everyone stay tuned for that. But otherwise, thank you for coming by. I mean, I know you and I could geek out on numbers all day and everything, but you've definitely dropped some incredible knowledge here with not just me, but the listeners. And I hope it truly does inspire some recruiters to sit down with a cup of coffee, a notebook, start working through some of these. So I know that if they do, their day-to-day moving forward is only going to get better. So everyone, that's the show. That is an incredible interview over with Will over here. So thanks for joining us. And until next time.
Yeah. Happy to be on. Thank you again. Have a great day.